Have you ever watched someone move through chaos with unshakable calm and wondered how they do it, while the rest of us react, panic, or get swept up in the storm? These individuals stand firm, not because they're immune to life's challenges, but because they've mastered the art of navigating them. There's a hidden framework behind this kind of resilience, a mental process honed over centuries by Stoic philosophers who understood that true strength isn't about avoiding adversity, but transforming how we perceive it. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic sage, put it perfectly: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That's the secret. Unshakable people don't control the world around them. They control their response to it. So what does that process actually look like? Imagine facing a crisis, a sudden loss, a crushing setback, or even just the daily friction of an unpredictable world, and instead of feeling overwhelmed, you meet it with clarity and purpose. That's the Stoic mindset in action. It's not about suppressing emotions or pretending hardship doesn't exist. It's about training yourself to separate what you can control from what you can't, to reframe obstacles as opportunities, and to cultivate a resilience that doesn't waver when life pushes back. The Stoics called this the discipline of perception, and it's the first step in building a mind that remains steady no matter what comes your way. But here's the real question: what if you could develop that same unshakable core? What if the calm, focus, and resilience you admire in others weren't just innate traits but skills you could learn? This video is your guide to the mental processes that make it possible. We'll break down the Stoic principles of control, perception, and resilience, not as abstract ideas, but as practical tools you can use to navigate chaos with confidence. By the end, you'll understand how to apply these timeless lessons to your own life, turning turbulence into a chance to grow stronger. So let's begin. How do you build a mind that doesn't just survive the storm but learns to dance in the rain? At the heart of Stoicism lies a simple but life-changing idea. We don't suffer because of what happens to us. We suffer because of how we interpret what happens. Epictetus, the former slave who became one of history's most influential Stoic teachers, put it bluntly: some things are within our control, and some things are not. The moment we grasp that distinction, everything changes. Think about the last time you felt stuck in frustration. Maybe a traffic jam threw off your schedule, or a colleague criticized your work. The traffic and the criticism weren't the real problem. The suffering came from how you reacted, the clenched fists, the racing thoughts, the stories you told yourself about fairness or competence. Stoics call this the dichotomy of control, and it's the foundation of unshakable resilience. Here's how it works in practice. Imagine two people facing the same setback, a missed promotion. One spirals into self-doubt, convinced the world is against them. The other pauses and asks, what part of this can I actually influence? They can't control their boss's decision, but they can control their effort, their preparation for the next opportunity, even their choice to learn from feedback rather than resent it. That shift in focus transforms the experience from demoralizing to empowering. This isn't about positive thinking, it's about precise thinking. The Stoics didn't deny pain or injustice, they just refused to let those things dictate their inner world. Consider a modern example: social media backlash. Someone posts a controversial opinion, and suddenly their notifications explode with anger. The unshakable person doesn't waste energy demanding others stop criticizing. They know they can't control that. Instead, they focus on what they can control, refining their message, engaging constructively, or simply logging off to protect their peace. every challenge becomes a chance to exercise this mental muscle, separating the unchangeable facts from the freedom we always have to choose our response. So here's a question to sit with. When did you last confuse external events with your power to choose how you faced them? That moment, whether it was a minor irritation or a major crisis, holds the key to building real resilience. Because when you stop trying to control the uncontrollable, you start discovering an unshakable strength you never knew you had. One of the most liberating truths Stoicism teaches is this: the weight we feel in difficult moments doesn't come from the events themselves, but from the meanings we assign to them. Seneca, the philosopher who counseled emperors, wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about that for a second. A delayed flight isn't just a scheduled change, it's a catastrophe because we tell ourselves it ruins our plans. A critical comment isn't just words, it's proof we're inadequate because we've decided to interpret it that way. The Stoics called this the judgment gap, the space between what happens and how we choose to see it. And in that gap lies our power to transform suffering into strength. Take something as mundane as a traffic jam. For most people, it's an infuriating waste of time, horns blaring, frustration boiling. But what if you saw it differently? What if, instead of gripping the wheel in anger, you used those 20 minutes to listen to an inspiring podcast, call a friend you've been meaning to catch up with, or simply practice observing your thoughts without reacting? The traffic hasn't changed, your experience of it has. This is the essence of perceptual reframing, recognizing that while you can't always control circumstances, you can always control what they mean to you. Seneca mastered this skill even in extreme adversity. Exiled to a remote island by a jealous emperor, he didn't collapse in despair. He wrote letters about the beauty of solitude, the chance to reflect deeply, and the freedom found in simplicity. His circumstances were harsh, but his perception turned them into fertile ground for growth. Modern psychology echoes this ancient wisdom. Cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, teaches that altering thought patterns can reshape emotional responses. The lesson is universal, whether you're stuck in traffic, facing a career setback, or navigating a personal crisis. The story you tell yourself determines whether you'll feel defeated or empowered. So here's a challenge. Pick one situation that's been weighing on you lately, maybe a conflict at work, a financial stressor, or even a recurring daily annoyance. Now ask yourself, what's another way to interpret this? Could there be a hidden lesson, an opportunity to practice patience, or a chance to strengthen a skill you've neglected? The goal isn't to pretend things are perfect, but to consciously choose a perspective that serves your resilience rather than undermines it. Because when you realize your judgments are the brushstrokes painting your experience, you hold the power to change the entire picture. There's a powerful Stoic exercise that might sound counterintuitive at first. What if, instead of avoiding thoughts of failure or hardship, you actively invited them in? The ancient Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Seneca, who famously advised his students to rehearse hardship in the mind, understood something profound. Fear loses its grip when we stop running from what scares us and instead face it with clear-eyed preparation. Picture a musician practicing a difficult piece hundreds of times before a performance. By the time they step on stage, the nerves fade because they've already lived through every possible stumble in their mind. That's the essence of this practice, not to dwell on negativity, but to disarm it by familiarizing yourself with life's uncertainties before they arrive. Take the fear of losing your job. Most people avoid even thinking about it until the moment it happens, leaving them emotionally blindsided. But someone practicing premeditatio malorum might sit down and ask, what if my position was eliminated tomorrow? They'd visualize packing their desk, updating their resume, reaching out to their network, not to catastrophize, but to objectively map out their options. Suddenly, the unknown becomes a series of manageable steps. Anxiety thrives on uncertainty. This practice replaces that fog with clarity. Seneca wrote letters describing how he'd mentally walk through losing his wealth, his status, even his health. By doing so, he realized none of those losses would destroy him, and that realization became his armor. This isn't about pessimism, it's about inoculation. Think of it like a vaccine. A small, controlled dose of the virus trains your immune system to handle the real thing. When you mentally rehearse challenges, a failed project, a difficult conversation, even a personal loss, you're not manifesting disaster. You're building emotional calluses. The Stoics believed that by regularly confronting worst-case scenarios in the safety of your imagination, you shrink their power in reality. Marcus Aurelius would start his day by reminding himself, "Today I'll meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance," not because he expected the worst, but because he refused to let the worst surprise him. Here's the twist: once you've walked through a fear in your mind, something unexpected happens. You often discover that the scenario you've been dreading carries hidden strengths within it. Maybe losing that job would push you to finally start the business you've dreamed of. Maybe a rejection would free you to explore a path better aligned with your values. Premeditatio malorum doesn't just prepare you for hardship, it reveals opportunities you'd otherwise overlook in the fog of avoidance. So try this tonight. Pick one fear that's been lingering in the back of your mind, something you've been avoiding because it feels too uncomfortable to confront. Now, for just 5 minutes, walk yourself through it step by step. Not with panic, but with curiosity. What would I do first? Who could I rely on? What might I learn? You might find, as the Stoics did, that the thing you feared loses its fangs when you stop turning away and finally meet its gaze. Now imagine looking at every setback, every disappointment, and saying with complete sincerity, "This is exactly what I needed." That's the radical practice of amorfati, Latin for love of fate. It's not passive resignation or toxic positivity. It's the active choice to embrace whatever life throws at you, not as a victim, but as an alchemist turning lead into gold. Marcus Aurelius captured this mindset perfectly when he wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." In other words, the obstacle isn't just something to endure, it's the raw material for your growth. Think about the last time a project you cared about failed. Maybe a business venture stalled, a creative idea flopped, or a personal goal slipped through your fingers. The instinct is to see it as a dead end, a waste of time. But what if you saw it as a detour steering you toward something better? History's most resilient innovators understood this. Thomas Edison's 10,000 failed attempts at the light bulb weren't disasters to him. They were lessons proving how not to do it. J.K. Rowling's rejection letters for Harry Potter didn't mean her story was worthless. They forced her to refine it until it became undeniable. Amor Fati flips the script. Setbacks aren't roadblocks, they're signposts redirecting you to where you're meant to go. Here's the profound truth hidden in this practice. When you stop resisting reality and start working with it, you unlock a superpower. Picture a sailor fighting against the wind, exhausting themselves trying to force a course. Now imagine that same sailor adjusting the sails, using that same wind to propel them forward. The wind hasn't changed, the sailor's relationship to it has. That's what loving your fate does. A missed promotion becomes space to explore a new career path. A broken relationship clears the way for deeper connections. Even illness can teach patience or refocus priorities. The Stoics weren't naive, they knew suffering was real. But they also knew that within every hardship lies a choice, to let it break you or to let it remake you. So here's an invitation. Look back at something you've labeled as a failure recently, a plan that fell through, a mistake that stung. Now ask, what if this happened for me, not to me? Maybe that rejected proposal saved you from a path that wasn't aligned with your values. Maybe that awkward conversation revealed a boundary you needed to set. Amorfati doesn't erase the pain, but it does reveal the purpose hidden within it. Because when you start seeing life's sharp edges as tools to sculpt your resilience, you stop fearing the storm and start dancing in the wind. What if the secret to contentment wasn't getting more, but wanting differently? This is the heart of Stoicism's discipline of desire, a radical rethinking of what it means to truly want something. Epictetus, who began life in chains before becoming a philosopher, put it plainly: freedom isn't secured by filling your pockets, but by emptying your wants. Think about that for a moment. Society tells us happiness lies in the next promotion, the bigger house, the perfect relationship. But the Stoics flip the script. Real freedom comes when you stop craving what's outside your control and start cherishing what's already within your grasp. Consider how we chase career advancements. Most people fixate on the title, the salary, the external validation. But what if you shifted your desire to something unshakable, the growth you gain from the work itself, the skills you sharpen, the integrity you bring to each task? That's the Stoic pivot. It's not about rejecting ambition. It's about redirecting it toward what you can actually own: your effort, your attitude, your willingness to learn. The promotion might depend on a boss's whim, but your commitment to excellence, that's yours to cultivate regardless of the outcome. Materialism thrives on this illusion that fulfillment is always one more purchase away. The Stoics saw through it centuries ago. Seneca mocked those who live as if they'll never die and die as if they'd never lived, chasing empty status symbols while neglecting their inner world. Contrast that with Marcus Aurelius, ruler of an empire, writing in his private journal, "Very little is needed to make a happy life, not because he lacked resources, but because he'd mastered the art of wanting wisely." Here's the challenge hiding in this ancient wisdom. What desire, if you let it go, would leave you lighter? Maybe it's the need for everyone to approve of you, the obsession with measuring up to a neighbor's success, or even the quiet hope that life should always be comfortable. The discipline of desire isn't about deprivation, it's about liberation. When you stop tying your peace to things that can be taken away, you discover a contentment that no market crash or missed opportunity can shake. Imagine two people stuck in traffic. One white knuckles the wheel, raging at the delay. The other sits back, savoring a podcast or the rare moment of quiet. Same circumstance, different suffering, because one is demanding reality bend to their will, while the other has chosen to want what's already here. That's the power of aligned desire. It doesn't erase life's friction, but it sure does soften the blows, because when you stop craving the unattainable, you start noticing the abundance that was there all along. Imagine standing at a crossroads where every path promises reward except one. That single road offers no applause, no guaranteed payoff, just the quiet certainty that it's the right thing to do. Which do you choose? This is the essence of the Stoic discipline of action. Doing good not because it serves you, but because it aligns with who you choose to be. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling the Roman Empire, wrote in his private meditations, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one. Not when it's convenient, not when it's celebrated, but consistently, even when no one's watching." Consider the modern workplace, where shortcuts often go unnoticed and ethical corners can seem tempting. Picture two employees faced with the same dilemma, a chance to take credit for a colleague's idea. One seizes the opportunity, reasoning that career advancement justifies the move. The other declines not out of fear of getting caught, but because claiming undeserved praise would violate their own standards. That second choice, acting with integrity despite the lost advantage, is Stoicism in motion. It's not about being rewarded for virtue, it's about virtue being its own reward. This philosophy shines brightest in everyday anonymity. The volunteer tutoring children without posting it on social media. The nurse who treats each patient with dignity regardless of their background. The neighbor who returns a lost wallet without hesitation. These aren't grand, dramatic gestures. They're quiet affirmations that some things are worth doing simply because they're right. The Stoics called this acting according to nature, meaning living in harmony with reason and moral purpose. When your actions stem from inner conviction rather than external validation, you build a resilience that no setback can erode. Marcus Aurelius faced this test daily. As emperor, he could have indulged every whim, yet he chose austerity over excess, fairness over favoritism. Why? Because he understood that true power isn't controlling others, it's mastering your own conduct. In one journal entry, he reminded himself, "It's ridiculous not to escape from your own vices, which is possible, while trying to escape the vices of others, which is impossible." That's the heart of the discipline of action, focusing not on how others behave, but on how you respond. Here's a challenge hiding in plain sight. When did you last do something purely because it was right, with zero expectation of recognition? Maybe you defended an unpopular truth at a meeting or chose honesty when a lie would have been easier. Those moments where the only witness was your conscience are where character is forged. The world will often reward the opposite, applauding clever compromises over quiet integrity. But the Stoics offer a different metric. The peace of knowing your actions matched your principles, regardless of who noticed. This isn't about perfection. Even Marcus Aurelius admitted to wrestling with his temper. The goal is progress, cultivating what the ancients called arete, or excellence of character, through daily practice. Every time you choose kindness over pettiness, effort over excuses, fairness over advantage, you're not just acting, you're becoming. And that transformation, more than any external trophy, is what makes a life unshakable. Here's a thought experiment. What if half the things you believe about yourself weren't actually true, but just stories you've accepted without question? That's where the Stoic discipline of assent comes in, the practice of pausing before letting any thought, emotion, or external judgment dictate your reality. Epictetus, who spent his early years in slavery before teaching philosophy, put it bluntly, "It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things." In other words, between what happens and how you react, there's a critical moment of choice. Most people miss it entirely, mistaking passing thoughts for absolute truth. But unshakable people, they've trained themselves to catch that moment like a lifeline. Take social media envy as a case study. You scroll through a friend's vacation photos, and suddenly there's that familiar pang. Their life seems perfect, mine stuck in neutral. The untrained mind accepts that narrative instantly. I'm falling behind, I'm not enough. But someone practicing the discipline of assent stops mid-scroll and asks, is this impression true? Maybe your friend's highlight reel hides their own struggles. Maybe your current season isn't about glamour but groundwork. The thought itself isn't the problem, it's the automatic assent, the unchecked belief that this fleeting emotion reflects reality. Epictetus compared the mind to a fortress. Impressions, thoughts, emotions, outside opinions are like messengers knocking at the gate. You don't have to let everyone in. Before granting entry, you interrogate them. Does this align with facts? Does it serve my growth? Imagine applying this to something as simple as a critical comment at work. Instead of spiraling into "I'm terrible at my job," you pause. Is this feedback accurate? If so, it's a chance to improve. If not, it's noise. That split-second interrogation changes everything. This practice isn't about denial or toxic positivity. It's about discernment. The Stoics recognize that our initial impressions are often distorted by fear, bias, or old wounds. Marcus Aurelius wrote pages of self-interrogation in his journals, questioning his own reactions. Why does this bother me? What's the deeper trigger? Modern psychology calls this metacognition, thinking about your thinking, and studies show it's a hallmark of emotional resilience. So here's your challenge. What belief about yourself is ripe for re-examination? Maybe it's I'm bad with money after one budgeting fail, or no one values my ideas because a few went unheard. Grab that thought like a suspicious package and inspect it. Where's the evidence? What's the counterargument? The goal isn't to swap negativity for blind optimism, but to trade autopilot reactions for conscious choice. Because when you realize your thoughts are guests, not governors, you reclaim the power to decide which ones deserve a seat at the table. There's a strange paradox about being human. We rarely appreciate what we have until we're on the verge of losing it. The Stoics knew this all too well, which is why they practiced something called negative visualization, a deliberate exercise where you imagine life without the people, comforts, or abilities you take for granted. Seneca put it simply, set aside a certain number of days during which you'll be content with the plainest food, the coarsest clothing, saying to yourself, "Is this what I used to dread?" It sounds counterintuitive, even morbid, but here's the twist. By mentally rehearsing loss, you don't cultivate fear, you awaken gratitude. Think about your morning routine, the warmth of running water, the smell of coffee, the text from a friend checking in. Now imagine waking up to a frozen pipe, a power outage, or radio silence from someone you love. Suddenly, those ordinary moments shimmer with value. That's the power of this practice. It's not about dwelling on darkness. It's about switching on the light of awareness so you see what's always been there. Seneca wrote letters urging his friends to count their blessings, not as a cliché, but as a daily discipline, to pause and recognize that health, companionship, even the ability to walk down the street unassisted are gifts, not guarantees. This isn't just ancient wisdom, modern science backs it up. Studies show that people who regularly practice gratitude experience lower stress levels and greater emotional resilience. But the Stoics took it further. They didn't just list what they were thankful for, they vividly imagined losing it. Picture a musician suddenly unable to play their instrument, or a writer losing their sight. By confronting these possibilities head-on, they stripped away the illusion of permanence that lets us coast through days half asleep to life's miracles. Try this tonight. Pick one mundane detail of your life, the way your partner hums off-key in the kitchen, the worn spine of a favorite book, even the convenience of a working refrigerator. Now close your eyes and visualize it gone. Not forever, just long enough to feel its absence like a phantom limb. When you reopen your eyes, that ordinary thing will feel different, not because it's changed, but because you finally let yourself see it. Relationships thrive under this lens. How often do you truly notice the way your best friend laughs until they snort, or the fact that your sibling still calls every Sunday? We assume these rhythms will last indefinitely until they don't. Negative visualization isn't about borrowing trouble. It's about savoring the present by acknowledging its fragility. Seneca lost his own son, yet wrote, "Let us cherish and love old age, for it is full of pleasure if one knows how to use it." Even in grief, he found a way to honor what remained by first facing what could be taken. Here's the challenge hiding in plain sight. What's your version of the plainest food and coarsest clothing? What tiny luxury or unremarkable habit would leave a gaping hole if it vanished tomorrow? Maybe it's the barrister who remembers your order, the way sunlight slants through your window at dusk, or simply the ability to take a deep breath without pain. When you start seeing the mundane as miraculous, resilience isn't something you build. It's something you uncover, layer by layer, in the life you already have. Picture yourself floating high above the earth, watching the swirl of clouds over continents, the slow dance of civilizations rising and falling across millennia. This is the view from above, a Stoic exercise that snaps daily worries into perspective by reminding us how small we are in time and space. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire, would write in his private journals about gazing down at the countless cities, the endless ceremonies, the vast expanse of wilderness, all just fleeting specks in the cosmic scale. He wasn't being dismissive of human struggles. He was giving himself an antidote to overwhelm. When you zoom out far enough, even the most crushing problems start to look like ripples in an ocean. Consider how we agonize over a rude email or a social slight, replaying it in our minds for days. Now imagine that same moment from the edge of the galaxy, 1,000,000 years from now. Does it still feel earth-shaking? The Stoics weren't suggesting we ignore our feelings, but they offered a powerful question to filter them. Will this matter in a year? A century, that presentation you're stressing over, that awkward encounter you can't stop cringing about, they're already fading in the rear-view mirror of time. The view from above isn't about diminishing your experiences. It's about freeing you from the illusion that any single moment defines your existence. Take something as universal as fear of failure. From ground level, a botched job interview feels like the end of the world. But from orbit, it's one thread in a tapestry of attempts, lessons, and redirections. The historian Will Durant captured this perfectly when he observed that we are what we repeatedly do. A single stumble isn't the story, it's the patterns across decades that shape a life. Marcus Aurelius would remind himself that even the grandest empires eventually turn to dust, so why let minor setbacks consume him? Here's the paradox this practice reveals. Realizing how insignificant we are in the universe doesn't shrink our lives, it expands them. When you stop treating every inconvenience like a catastrophe, you save energy for what truly resonates across time. The artist creating work that outlives them, the teacher shaping generations, the parent building a legacy of love. These are the ripples that stretch beyond our brief moment. The rest just weather passing through. Try this the next time a problem feels insurmountable. Close your eyes and mentally zoom out past your street, your country, the glowing curve of the planet hanging in space. Then zoom out further past the lifespans of mountains and stars. Whatever's troubling you now is both infinitely small and part of something vast. That's the gift of the view from above. It doesn't erase your struggles, but it does remind you that you're made of stardust, spinning on a rock that survived far worse. And just like that rock, you'll keep turning toward the light. There's a reason Epictetus called the Dichotomy of Control the philosopher's most useful task. It's not just a mental exercise, it's a liberation. When you draw that clear line between what you can influence and what you can't, something extraordinary happens. The weight of the world lifts. The Stoic teacher put it plainly: make the best use of what's in your power and take the rest as it happens. That's the secret to serenity, not passive surrender, but active focus where it actually matters. Take something as universal as running late. You've got an important meeting, you've planned your route, but then gridlock. Horns blare, minutes tick by, and your grip on the steering wheel tightens. Here's the fork in the road. You can't control the traffic, but you can control whether you arrive flustered or composed. That's the pivot point. One person spends the ride fuming, rehearsing angry excuses. Another calls ahead calmly, uses the delay to review notes, or simply accepts that lateness isn't a moral failing, it's traffic. Same scenario, entirely different experience. The difference: one is fighting reality, the other is working with it. This principle scales to every frustration. A colleague's sharp email, you can't control their tone, but you can control whether you reply with grace or react with defensiveness. A sudden rainstorm on picnic day, you can't stop the downpour, but you can pivot to board games and hot cocoa. Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching philosophy, knew this better than anyone. Suffering isn't in the events themselves, but in our refusal to accept what we can't change. His famous metaphor still resonates. Imagine your foot could feel resentment for getting muddy. Would you cut it off? No, you'd accept that feet get dirty. So why rage against life's inevitable messes? So here's a question to sit with today. What's one thing you're exhausting yourself trying to control that isn't actually yours to command? Maybe it's a family member's choices, a boss's unfair favoritism, or even society's direction. Notice where your energy is leaking, not to judge yourself, but to redirect it. Because when you stop pouring effort into moving immovable objects, you free up reserves for what you can shape: your focus, your effort, your next step forward. That's the alchemy of the dichotomy. It doesn't just simplify life, it amplifies your power. Stoic resilience isn't about gritting your teeth and enduring life's blows. It's about recognizing that every challenge is an invitation to grow stronger. Seneca compared the mind to iron forged in fire. Difficulties strengthen the mind as labor does the body. Think about that image. Metal doesn't become a sword by lying untouched in a workshop. It's hammered, heated, and honed. The same principle applies to us. Resilience isn't something you're born with. It's something you build by willingly stepping into discomfort, not just surviving it, but using it. Consider how elite athletes train. A marathon runner doesn't wait for race day to test their limits. They push through grueling miles in rain, heat, and exhaustion long before the starting line. Each aching muscle isn't a sign of weakness, it's proof they're preparing for something greater. Entrepreneurs operate the same way. Every failed pitch, every rejected proposal isn't a dead end, it's data. They're not passively absorbing setbacks, they're actively dissecting them, asking, what can this teach me? That shift from victim to student is the essence of Stoic endurance. Now apply this to your own life. What if that stressful job, that strained relationship, or even that financial tight spot wasn't just hardship, but your personal training ground? A chef learns from burned dishes. A musician masters rhythm through missed notes. Why should your struggles be any different? Seneca wrote, "Fire tests gold, adversity tests the strong." The key word here is tests, not destroys. When you start seeing obstacles as sparring partners rather than enemies, you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this preparing me for? Here's the unexpected truth. The most resilient people aren't those who avoid failure. They're the ones who have learned to mine it for wisdom. Imagine two people facing unemployment. One spirals into self-pity, convinced the universe is against them. The other treats it like a sabbatical, updating skills, networking, even exploring passions they'd sidelined. Both experience the same event, but only one emerges stronger. That's the power of reframing. The Stoics didn't worship suffering, but they understood its role. Like a sculptor seeing the masterpiece hidden in rough marble, they knew endurance isn't about bearing weight, it's about shaping it into strength. So here's a question to carry with you today. What current challenge could you stop resenting and start treating as training? Maybe it's that project pushing you out of your comfort zone, or the patience required to mend a friendship. Whatever it is, try this. Approach it not as something to endure, but as something to engage with. Because the difference between a burden and a gymnasium is nothing but perspective. And perspective, as the Stoics taught us, is the one thing we can always control. Imagine ending each day not with endless scrolling, but with a quiet conversation with your wiser self. That's the power of Stoic journaling, not just recording events, but excavating their meaning. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the ancient world, scribbled his private reflections by candlelight, creating Meditations, a book never meant for publication, just for growth. His pages reveal raw self-dialogue. When you wake in the morning, tell yourself, today I'll meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance, not as complaints but as mental preparation. That's the magic of putting pen to paper. It turns life's chaos into clarity, one sentence at a time. Think of journaling like a daily debrief with your future self. A conflict at work doesn't have to fester in your mind. You can unpack it on the page. What part of this tension was within my control? Did I respond with integrity or react from ego? The act of writing forces precision where emotions blur the lines. Seneca did this through letters to his friend Lucilius, dissecting his own reactions like a scientist studying specimens. I examine my entire day, he wrote, and review what I've done and said. No sugarcoating, no spin, just honest accounting. Here's how to make it practical. Tonight, try this prompt. What's one moment today where I confused what happened with my judgment about it? Maybe you misinterpreted a colleague's short reply as disdain, or assumed a missed call meant rejection. Writing it out exposes the gap between fact and fiction. Epictetus called this separating the event from your commentary. The traffic jam wasn't personal, your frustration was. The criticism wasn't an attack, your defensiveness was. Journaling shines light on those shadows. Marcus Aurelius had a brilliant habit. He'd write advice to himself as if counseling a friend. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. The obstacle is the way. Try that shift in perspective. Next time you're rattled by a situation, open a notebook and address yourself by name. What's truly at stake here? What would your calmest version do? It's astonishing how solutions emerge when you stop ruminating and start articulating. So here's your invitation. Before bed tonight, steal 5 minutes from the digital noise and ask one Stoic question. What did I today that aligned with my values? Where did I let externals dictate my peace? No need for perfect prose, just honest excavation. Because when you journal like a Stoic, you're not just writing words, you're drafting the blueprint of the person you're choosing to become. Imagine standing in the middle of an argument where every word you say seems to pour gasoline on the fire. Now picture doing the opposite, staying quiet, letting the heat dissipate, and watching clarity emerge from the smoke. That's the power of Stoic silence, a practice Epictetus called the first step to wisdom. He didn't mean muteness or passivity. He meant the discipline of withholding words until they serve a purpose beyond ego or reaction. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth, he reminded his students, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. In a world that equates quick comebacks with strength, Stoics understood the real power lies in the space between stimuli and response, the sacred pause where reason outpaces reflex. Take a workplace dispute where 2 colleagues clash over credit for a project. One escalates with accusations, the other matches energy with defensiveness. Now replay that scene with a twist. One person stops speaking entirely, not out of surrender but strategy. They listen, truly listen, to the frustration beneath the words. The silence becomes a mirror, forcing the other to hear their own tone. Without fuel, the fire burns out. That's Stoic silence in action, not avoiding conflict but disarming it by refusing to play the game. History's greatest negotiators know this. Nelson Mandela spent years in prison mastering the art of listening before speaking, turning adversaries into allies not by overpowering them, but by understanding them first. Epictetus took it further. If someone speaks badly of you, don't argue. Just say, they don't know my other faults, or they'd have mentioned those too. That's the humor in it. Silence isn't weakness, it's the ultimate confidence. Picture a social media pile-on where someone's dragged for an old tweet. Most scramble to explain or delete. The Stoic approach: let the storm pass. The more you react, the longer it lasts. Like a judo master using an opponent's momentum against them, silence lets reckless words collapse under their own weight. So here's a challenge hiding in plain sight. When did your words last make a situation worse instead of better? Maybe it was interrupting a partner mid-argument to correct a detail, or firing off an email in anger that required 3 more to clean up. The Stoics would ask, what did speaking actually achieve? Often we talk to fill discomfort, to prove a point, or to cling to the illusion of control. But real mastery comes when you stop needing the last word. Think of a time someone hurt you and you chose not to retaliate. Not because you didn't have the words, but because you had the wisdom to know they wouldn't land as intended. That restraint isn't suppression, it's liberation. It's the difference between being jerked around by every provocation and moving through the world with unshakable agency. The next time tension rises, try this experiment. Let 3 breaths pass before responding. Not to plan your counterattack, but to ask, will this add light or just heat? Sometimes the most powerful statement is the one you never make. Your morning routine sets the tone for everything that follows, which is why Seneca insisted on claiming those first quiet hours for yourself before the world makes its demands. He wrote, begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life, not by cramming more tasks into the dawn, but by creating space to align your mind before chaos kicks in. Think of it like sharpening an axe before chopping wood. Those few intentional minutes determine whether you'll spend the day hacking blindly or moving with purpose. Here's what that looks like in practice. Instead of reaching for your phone and flooding your brain with notifications, try this. Wake up 5 minutes earlier and sit with a single passage from Marcus Aurelius or Epictetus. Not to analyze it like homework, but to let it land. Today I shall meet interference, ingratitude, arrogance. Marcus would remind himself, not as a complaint, but as mental inoculation, anticipating friction so it wouldn't throw him off balance when it arrived. Or take Seneca's advice to ask yourself at dawn, what's one thing I can do today to align with my values? That question, posed in the quiet, becomes a compass needle for the hours ahead. The magic lies in consistency, not complexity. You don't need an hour-long ritual. Even 90 seconds of deliberate breathing while mentally reciting a Stoic mantra, I control my choices, not my circumstances, can anchor you. Naval Admiral James Stockdale, who survived 7 years as a POW by leaning on Epictetus' teachings, described starting each day by whispering, "This is my arena." No grand gestures, just a quiet reclaiming of agency before the battle began. So here's your challenge. What's one micro habit you could borrow from the Stoics tomorrow morning? Maybe it's writing down one intention, not a to-do, but a quality you want to embody, like patience or curiosity. Or perhaps it's pausing at your front door to visualize how you'll respond if things go sideways. The key isn't the specific activity. It's the act of pressing pause before life presses play. Because when you dedicate those first moments to stewardship of your mind, something remarkable happens. The rest of the day stops happening to you and starts happening through you. As the sun dips below the horizon and the noise of the day fades, there's a quiet power in turning inward, not just to unwind, but to distill wisdom from what's unfolded. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who ruled an empire by day, reserved his nights for something far more intimate, a dialogue with himself. In the flickering light of his lamp, he'd page through the events of his hours like an archaeologist sifting through artifacts, asking not did I win, but did I live with integrity? That's the essence of Stoic evening reflection, not a passive replay of the day's highlights, but an active excavation of what each moment revealed about your character. Picture this: you're wrapping up a chaotic workday where a client snapped at you unfairly. Your instinct might be to vent or scroll mindlessly to escape the tension. But what if instead you stole just 5 minutes to ask, how did I handle that friction? Did I meet their energy, or did I anchor myself in patience? That's the practice in action. Marcus called these nightly audits his accounting of the soul, jotting down observations like, when you lose your temper, you've lost the battle twice, first by reacting, then by regretting. His journals weren't for self-flagellation, they were training logs for the mind. Here's how to make it tangible. Tonight, try this 2-question framework. What today tested my principles, and how did I respond? Maybe you held your tongue when a colleague took credit for your idea, choosing long-term harmony over short-term justice. Or perhaps you caught yourself over-apologizing for a minor mistake and course-corrected. The key is specificity. Don't settle for "I was stressed." Dig deeper. Did stress make me curt with the barrister, or did I pause to acknowledge their humanity? Those micro moments, dissected without judgment, become your growth map. Consider a parent navigating a toddler's meltdown at bedtime. In the exhaustion of the moment, they might snap, or they might take a breath and kneel to eye level. The reflection later isn't about guilt tripping over imperfection. It's about noticing patterns. What triggered my impatience? Was it really the child's behavior, or my own unmet need for quiet? That's the gold hidden in evening reflection. It turns daily stumbles into stepping stones. Seneca compared this practice to cleansing a wound, not to reopen it, but to let it heal cleanly. So here's your invitation tonight. Before sleep claims you, light a metaphorical lamp like Marcus did. Ask not just what went well, but where did I exercise wisdom I didn't have last month? Maybe it was letting go of a grudge or choosing curiosity over defensiveness in a debate. Those small victories, spotted and honored, compound into unshakable resilience. Because when you end each day not with mindless distraction, but with mindful reckoning, you don't just sleep, you evolve. There's a common misconception that Stoicism is about shutting off emotions, that to be unshakable means becoming cold or detached. Nothing could be further from the truth. The Stoics weren't against feeling, they were masters of directing those feelings with purpose. Consider Hierocles, the Stoic philosopher who described humanity as a series of concentric circles, with yourself at the center, then family, friends, community, and finally all of humankind. His radical idea, that wisdom lies not in keeping those circles rigidly separate, but in consciously drawing the outer circles inward, treating strangers with the care you'd show a neighbor, and neighbors with the loyalty you'd reserve for family. That's Stoic compassion, not less emotion but more extended further with greater intention. Take parenting as an example. When a child throws a tantrum, the easy response is frustration or impatience. But the Stoic approach asks a different question. What's the unmet need beneath this outburst? Instead of reacting to the behavior, you respond to the humanity behind it. Marcus Aurelius, despite ruling an empire, wrote reminders to himself like, when people injure you, ask yourself, what good or harm did they think would come of it? That's not indifference, it's deep empathy. It's recognizing that even hurtful actions often stem from misunderstanding or fear, and meeting that pain with clarity rather than retaliation. Leadership thrives on this principle too. Imagine a team member missing a deadline. The knee-jerk reaction might be reprimand, but the Stoic leader pauses. Is this a pattern of negligence or a rare lapse from someone usually reliable? The former requires accountability. The latter might call for a quiet conversation uncovering burnout or personal struggles. Seneca, who advised Emperor Nero, stressed that true strength includes the capacity to listen. We are members of one great body. Nature planted in us a mutual love. His version of power wasn't dominance, it was service tempered by wisdom. So here's a challenge hiding in plain sight. Who in your life could use the gift of understanding today? Not the performative kind, but the quiet, intentional variety. The coworker whose sharp tone masks stress. The stranger whose brusqueness reflects loneliness. Even the part of yourself that's been quick to judge. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress compassion. It refines it. Like sunlight focused through a lens, it takes the warmth we naturally feel for those closest to us and directs it outward, farther and brighter, until nothing and no one stands in shadow. Consider the last time you nervously checked social media after posting something personal, waiting for likes, bracing for comments. Now imagine feeling that same flutter of anticipation, but this time asking yourself, why does their approval matter more than my own? That's the heart of Stoic indifference, not a lack of care, but a recalibration of what deserves your attention. Epictetus, the philosopher who shaped Roman emperors and slaves alike, dismissed applause as just the clatter of tongues. Not because achievement was meaningless, but because he knew the roar of the crowd could drown out something far more important, your own inner compass. History's most enduring creators understood this. Vincent van Gogh sold barely a handful of paintings in his lifetime, yet wrote to his brother, "I am seeking, I am striving, I am in it with all my heart." Jane Austen published anonymously in an era that dismissed women's voices, honing her craft without expectation of acclaim. Their work wasn't fueled by the promise of praise, it was an expression of personal truth. The Stoics would argue this isn't martyrdom, it's liberation. When your sense of worth isn't chained to external validation, you create not for the audience of the moment, but for the ages. This isn't about rejecting feedback. Even Marcus Aurelius, whose journal became a timeless guide, sought counsel from trusted mentors. The distinction lies in dependency versus discernment. Imagine two chefs. One obsessively tweaks recipes based on every online comment, while the other tests dishes with a few seasoned peers, then refines from conviction. The first is enslaved to trends, the second is anchored in craft. Epictetus put it bluntly, if someone told you that others spoke ill of you, would you rush to defend yourself? Then why do you crave their praise? So here's a mirror to hold up. Whose approval have you been treating as oxygen? A boss's nod, a parent's pride, the algorithmic favor of strangers. Notice the weight you've assigned to these voices, not to judge yourself, but to ask, what would I create? How would I live if no one was watching? That question isn't hypothetical. It's the key to unlocking work that resonates with authenticity rather than applause. Because when you stop performing for spectators, you start creating for the only audience that truly endures. The version of you who will look back one day and ask, did I live by my own light? There's a peculiar paradox about comfort. The more we chase it, the softer our minds become. The Stoics knew this well, especially Musonius Rufus, the philosopher who insisted that voluntary hardship was the gymnasium for the soul. He didn't advocate for suffering, but for strategically stepping into discomfort to inoculate yourself against life's inevitable blows. Picture him urging his students to skip the warm cloak in winter or pass on a second helping at meals. Not because deprivation was virtuous, but because choosing small hardships voluntarily, like cold showers or occasional fasting, strengthen their capacity to handle the big ones involuntarily. This isn't just ancient asceticism. Modern science backs it up. Navy SEAL train in freezing water to adapt to extreme stress. Athletes use high-altitude masks to simulate oxygen deprivation. Even Silicon Valley CEOs swear by comfort challenges, sleeping on the floor, taking ice baths, or fasting for clarity. The principle is universal. By willingly embracing manageable discomfort, you rewire your brain's relationship with adversity. It's like a vaccine for resilience. The cold shower you choose today makes the unexpected financial setback or health scare tomorrow feel less like a crisis and more like another challenge to adapt to. Musonius Rufus put it bluntly, "How can a person become courageous if they've only experienced comfort?" His answer was to practice courage in miniature, skipping dessert when cravings hit, walking instead of driving, or waking up 15 minutes earlier to sit with silence before the day's noise begins. These aren't punishments, they're rehearsals. When you deliberately step into discomfort, you prove to yourself that you can tolerate more than you think. The Stoic philosopher wasn't trying to make life harder, he was making his students harder to break. Think of it like callousing your hands. A musician's fingers blister before they toughen. A weightlifter's palms sting before they grow resilient. Your mind works the same way. Every time you choose the stairs over the elevator, or a difficult conversation over avoidance, you're not just building discipline, you're erasing the illusion that ease equals happiness. Seneca, who enjoyed wealth but practiced poverty, wrote, "Set aside days where you'll be content with the plainest food, the coarsest clothing." Why? Not to glorify scarcity, but to expose the lie that luxury is what makes life good. So here's a question to carry into your week. What tiny discomfort could you invite in, not as a test of endurance, but as an act of empowerment? Maybe it's leaving your phone outside the bedroom to face the restlessness of undistracted sleep, or taking the criticism you've been avoiding head-on instead of rationalizing it away. The goal isn't to suffer needlessly, it's to remind yourself that you're always stronger than the comfort you cling to. Because when you voluntarily step into the cold, you stop fearing the winter. Imagine tripping spectacularly in public, not the subtle stumble you can play off, but the full arms flailing, coffee flying, sidewalk meets face kind of fall. Now picture two responses. One where you scramble up, red-faced, convinced everyone's judging you, and another where you burst out laughing at the absurdity of the moment. That second reaction, pure Stoic humor in action. Seneca, who counseled emperors through crises, wrote that wisdom isn't about solemnity, it's about holding gravity and lightness in the same hand. We should make light of all things, he advised, and bear them with a smile. Not because life's challenges aren't real, but because sometimes the healthiest way to carry their weight is to laugh at how ridiculous they can be. Take parenting as a case study. A toddler's meltdown over a banana broken the wrong way feels apocalyptic in the moment until you zoom out and realize the sheer comedy of arguing with a tiny human about fruit geometry. The Stoics wouldn't dismiss the frustration, but they'd remind you, this too shall pass, and someday you'll recount the story at family dinners for laughs. Even Marcus Aurelius, who bore the weight of an empire, kept a playful perspective. In his private journals, he'd poke fun at human pettiness, writing lines like, "Alexander the Great and his mule driver both ended up dead, so much for status." It wasn't cynicism, it was a way to deflate ego and remind himself not to take life's drama too seriously. Modern psychology backs this up. Studies show that people who can laugh at their own mishaps recover from stress faster. Think of it like emotional alchemy. Tripping on stage during a presentation transforms from a nightmare to a legendary anecdote when you choose to frame it as comedy instead of catastrophe. The blooper reels of our lives aren't failures, they're proof we're human. Seneca loved recounting his own missteps, like the time he lectured on poverty while riding in a lavish litter. Instead of hiding the hypocrisy, he laughed at it, turning the moment into a lesson about self-awareness. So here's an invitation. What's your recent disaster that could use a comedic reframe? Maybe it's the botched dinner you ordered in a language you don't speak, or the autocorrect fail that turned a professional email into nonsense. The Stoics wouldn't tell you to ignore the sting of embarrassment. They'd just nudge you to notice how quickly today's crisis becomes tomorrow's punchline. Because when you can chuckle at life's plot twists, you don't just survive them, you start collecting stories that make the journey richer. After all, as Seneca quipped, we suffer more in imagination than reality. So why not imagine the future version of you already laughing about it? Death is the great equalizer, the one certainty that strips away all pretenses and leaves only what truly matters in sharp relief. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire yet never forgot his mortality, wrote in his private journal, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think." Not as a morbid fixation, but as a lens to clarify priorities. Imagine holding that thought lightly in your mind each morning. This day could be my last, how shall I live it? Not with fear, but with fierce presence. Consider how differently we'd spend our hours if we truly internalized this. The colleague who nitpicks your work, the traffic jam that ruins your mood, the endless scroll through trivial updates, none of it would land with the same weight. Contrast that with the moments we often postpone, the heartfelt conversation with a parent, the creative project we're too busy to start, the reconciliation we delay out of pride. Stoic memento mori, the practice of remembering death, isn't about dwelling on the end. It's about awakening to the gift of the now. History's most impactful lives were often shaped by this awareness. Steve Jobs, in his famous Stanford commencement speech, reflected on how remembering death cleared out the old and left only what was essential. The Roman Stoics carried skulls as paperweights. Japanese samurai wrote death poems. These weren't acts of gloom, but rituals to strip away illusion. When you know the sand in the hourglass is finite, you stop wasting it on resentment, pretense, or waiting for permission to live boldly. Here's the piercing question hiding in this practice. What would you regret not doing if your time ran out tomorrow? Not the grandiose achievements, but the quiet omissions. The love unexpressed, the curiosity unexplored, the risks not taken because comfort felt safer than growth. The poet Mary Oliver distilled it to its essence. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? But memento mori isn't just about seizing the day, it's about releasing what doesn't serve you. Picture two versions of yourself at life's end, one haunted by, "I wish I'd cared less about others' opinions," the other at peace because they lived by their own compass. The petty arguments, the people-pleasing, the energy spent chasing status, none of it lingers in the final reckoning. Seneca wrote letters from his deathbed marveling at how much time he'd wasted on false duties, while true joys went neglected. His lesson: don't wait for the end to see clearly. So try this today. Walk through your routines as if each were your last, not to paralyze yourself, but to notice what gains urgency and what fades to irrelevance. That email you're overthinking probably doesn't matter. The sunset you keep missing because you're too busy. Death isn't the enemy of a life well lived. It's the ally that strips away the trivial and leaves behind only what's real. And when you live like that, even ordinary moments become charged with a quiet, unshakable purpose. History gives us living textbooks of resilience, not in dusty pages, but in the flesh and blood stories of those who walked through fire and emerged unbroken. Take Cato the Younger, the Roman senator who stood alone against Julius Caesar's rising tyranny. While others compromised, Cato chose principle over power, even as his world crumbled around him. On the night of his death, he didn't rage against his fate. He calmly reread Plato's dialogues on the immortality of the soul before taking his own life rather than surrender his values. What's striking isn't the act itself, but the mindset behind it. A man so aligned with his convictions that even defeat couldn't shake his integrity. The Stoics revered him not for his politics, but for his unwavering commitment to live and die on his own terms. Now fast forward 2 millennia to Nelson Mandela's prison cell on Robben Island. For 27 years, he endured brutal conditions, yet emerged without bitterness, telling his people, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." Like Cato, Mandela understood that true resilience isn't about avoiding suffering, but about choosing how to carry it. Where Cato drew strength from philosophy, Mandela found his in purpose, the vision of a united South Africa. Different eras, different struggles, but the same Stoic thread, an unbreakable core built on something deeper than circumstance. These aren't just historical footnotes, they're blueprints. The entrepreneur facing bankruptcy can study how Walt Disney rebuilt after losing his first animation studio. The activist fighting for change can look to Susan B. Anthony, who spent 50 years campaigning for women's suffrage knowing she wouldn't live to see victory. What unites them all is the deliberate cultivation of what the Stoics called hegemonikon, the inner citadel that no external force can breach. So here's a question to sit with, whose steadfastness lights a fire in you. Maybe it's a grandparent who weathered wars with quiet dignity, a scientist like Marie Curie who kept working through poverty and prejudice, or even a fictional hero like Atticus Finch standing alone for justice. The key isn't to idolize them, but to reverse engineer their resilience. How did they reframe setbacks? What mantras anchored them? When their knees buckled, what kept them standing? Because role models aren't just inspiration, they're proof that unshakable strength isn't born, it's built. And if they could forge that kind of courage in their storms, what might you be capable of in yours? The most transformative breakthroughs often begin with a roadblock, a moment when everything seems to stop, except your ability to choose what happens next. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who faced rebellions, plagues, and personal losses, scribbled a line in his journal that would echo through centuries. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. At first glance, it sounds like stubborn optimism, but dig deeper, and you'll find a radical blueprint for turning barriers into engines. Take the story of Airbnb's founders, who hit a wall in 2008 when their rent payments were due and their air mattress bed and breakfast idea wasn't taking off. Instead of collapsing under the pressure, they spotted an opportunity in their obstacle. The lack of bookings wasn't just a failure, it was feedback. They pivoted, selling vintage cereal boxes labeled Obama O's and Captain McCain during the presidential election to fund their startup. The cash kept them afloat, but the real win was the lesson. Scarcity forced creativity. Their obstacle didn't block the path, it became the path. Or consider athletes like Bethany Hamilton, the surfer who lost her arm to a shark at 13. Most would see a career-ending tragedy. She saw a puzzle, how to adapt her technique to ride waves with one arm. Within months, she was back on her board, not despite her injury, but because of the relentless focus it demanded. Her limitation didn't weaken her, it distilled her purpose. As Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who turned the hardship of slavery into a life of teaching, would say, "Circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him." Here's the invisible alchemy at work. Obstacles don't just test resilience, they redesign it. A startup's near bankruptcy exposes flawed assumptions sharper than any consultant could. A writer's rejection letters strip away complacency, leaving only the raw hunger to improve. Even daily frustrations, the delayed flight, the abrupt cancellation, are rehearsals for grace under pressure. The Stoics called this the art of acquiescence, the deliberate practice of accepting what you can't change so you can pour all your energy into what you can. So here's a question to turn over in your mind. What if your current obstacle isn't a detour, but the most direct route to growth? Maybe that difficult colleague is training you in patience, or the financial squeeze is forcing you to innovate. Marcus Aurelius would urge you to look for the hidden advantage in the resistance, the way a fire tempers steel, because when you stop seeing barriers as stop signs and start treating them as signposts, you don't just overcome challenges, you absorb their strength. And that's when the real transformation begins. Friendship was sacred to the Stoics, not as a social convenience, but as a mirror for the soul. Seneca, who exchanged some of history's most profound letters with his friend Lucilius, described true connection as two souls moving in harmony. Not because they share the same interests or offer mutual advantage, but because they reflect back to each other the highest versions of themselves. Imagine two musicians tuning their instruments not to the same note, but to the same key, each distinct, yet creating something greater together. That's the essence of Stoic friendship, bonds forged not by what we can take, but by what we can become in each other's presence. Contrast this with the transactional relationships that dominate modern life, the networking contacts who vanish when your job title changes, the fair-weather friends who drift away when hardship strikes. The Stoics warned against these utility-based connections like sailors avoiding shallow waters. Epictetus dismissed them outright. If someone only values you for what you provide, their affection dies the moment you stop providing. History's most enduring friendships, like that of Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, who debated fiercely but rebuilt their bond through decades of letters, weren't built on convenience. They were anchored in mutual respect for each other's character, surviving political rivalries and silence alike. Think of the people who have left fingerprints on your life. Not the ones who laughed at your jokes at parties, but those who asked the uncomfortable questions that made you grow, the teacher who challenged your half-hearted effort, the colleague who refused to let you shrink from your potential, even the friend who risked tension to say, "This isn't like you." These are Seneca's souls in harmony, relationships where honesty matters more than flattery and growth trumps comfort. Marcus Aurelius found this in his mentor Rusticus, whose influence he credited not for making him feel admired, but for showing me I needed to reform my character. Here's a litmus test hiding in plain sight. Who in your life makes you want to rise when they enter the room? Not because they intimidate you, but because their mere presence reminds you of the person you aspire to be. It might not be the friend you see most often, but the one whose conversations leave you energized for days, whose integrity quietly raises your own standards. And here's the harder question. Are you that person for someone else? Stoic friendship isn't passive, it's an active commitment to reflect virtue back like sunlight off a blade, sharpening both souls in the process. The irony is that these bonds often defy conventional measures of closeness. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien met weekly with their literary group, the Inklings, not to exchange favors, but to ruthlessly critique each other's unfinished manuscripts. Tolkien once told Lewis his poetry was utterly worthless. Yet that friction produced The Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. Their friendship wasn't about ease, it was about elevation. That's the Stoic ideal, surrounding yourself with those who love you too much to let you stay where you are. Because in a world full of people who will clap when you shine, the rarest gems are those who hand you a chisel when they see your rough edges and trust you to do the same for them. Every major decision carries an invisible question, not just what do I want, but who do I want to become? The Stoics knew this intimately. Epictetus, the philosopher who transformed his enslavement into a masterclass on inner freedom, offered a razor-sharp filter for choices. Ask yourself what a wise person would do, then do that. Not what's easiest, not what's most applauded, but what aligns with the person you're committed to being. This isn't about perfection, it's about direction. Imagine standing at a career crossroads. One path offers prestige but drains your integrity, while the other feels uncertain but resonates with your values. The unshakable person doesn't ask, "How will this look?" They ask, "How will this shape me?" Consider a modern relationship dilemma. You've been tolerating dismissive behavior from a partner, biting your tongue to keep the peace. The Stoic pause here isn't about blaming or fleeing. It's about excavating the deeper question: does staying in this dynamic make me more or less of the person I respect? Epictetus would urge you to interrogate the fear beneath the avoidance. Fear of loneliness, of starting over. Then he'd deliver the gut punch. It's better to leave the party early than to stay and lose yourself. History's wisest decisions often look like losses in the moment, turning down lucrative but unethical deals, walking away from toxic dynamics, even abandoning comfortable routines for uncharted growth. What makes them wise isn't the outcome, but the alignment. Now apply this to that decision you've been circling like a wary cat. Maybe it's leaving a stable job to pursue a passion, or finally setting boundaries with a draining family member. The friction isn't a sign you're choosing wrong. It's proof you're choosing meaningfully. Think of Marcus Aurelius weighing imperial decrees not by their popularity, but by whether they'd hold up under the scrutiny of his own journal. Or Susan B. Anthony sacrificing comfort for decades to advance women's rights, knowing she wouldn't live to see victory. Their power came from treating decisions not as isolated events, but as bricks in the foundation of their character. Here's the liberating truth hiding in Stoic decision-making. Clarity comes not from eliminating fear, but from placing it in proper perspective. That promotion you're afraid to pursue. The relationship conversation you're dodging, they're not just about external outcomes, they're integrity checks. When you pause to ask, what would the wisest version of me choose? You're not seeking a perfect answer. You're training yourself to recognize the gap between impulse and principle, and to bridge it with action. Because in the end, our choices don't just reflect our values, they sculpt them, one courageous yes or no at a time. Marcus Aurelius once wrote that the past is nothing but smoke, dissipated, untouchable, impossible to reclaim. Yet how many of us keep grasping at those fading wisps, letting yesterday's regrets or resentments cloud today's clarity? The Stoics understood something profound. Clinging to the past isn't just unproductive, it actively robs you of the only moment you ever truly possess, the present. Picture someone dragging an anchor through shallow water, convinced its weight keeps them safe, never realizing it's what's holding them back. That's what happens when we confuse memory with meaning, or nostalgia with nourishment. Take grudges as an example. That friend who betrayed you years ago, the boss who overlooked your contributions, replaying those scenes in your mind doesn't change what happened. It just relives the hurt. Seneca compared holding a grudge to drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. The irony, the past offender has likely moved on, while you're stuck in an emotional loop of your own making. Now contrast that with someone who consciously chooses to release the narrative of victimhood. It doesn't mean they excuse the wrongdoing, they simply refuse to let it dictate their present peace. Like a tree shedding dead leaves to make room for new growth, They understand that some stories must be released to survive. Nostalgia works the same trap, just dressed in softer hues. Yearning for simpler times or a former version of yourself can feel comforting, but it's often a subtle denial of life's inevitable evolution. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire in constant flux, yet he reminded himself daily, you cannot step into the same river twice. The teenager you mourn for their spontaneity, the career path you romanticize, those chapters are gone. But the person you are now, the choices before you today, those are alive with possibility. The musician who wastes energy wishing for their first sold-out show might miss the chance to create their masterpiece now. The parent fixated on their child's toddler years overlooks the extraordinary person standing right in front of them. Here's the pivot point: letting go isn't about erasing history. It's about reclaiming your power to interpret it. A sailor doesn't curse the storm that battered their ship. They use it to navigate better next time. The Stoics called this apatheia, not apathy, but clear-eyed acceptance. When a farmer loses a crop to drought, they don't spend the next season staring at the barren field. They till the soil anew. Your past failures, heartbreaks, even triumphs are just fertile ground for what's next if you're willing to plant fresh seeds instead of digging up old roots. So here's a question to sit with today. What old story have you been mistaking for part of your identity? The injustice you can't forget, the glory days you keep comparing to the present, the version of yourself you think you should still be. Try this: write it down on a slip of paper, then burn it or tear it up, not as a ritual of avoidance, but as a declaration. The past is smoke, and you're ready to breathe freely again. Because when you stop carrying what's already gone, you'll finally feel how light your hands are to hold what's here. The mark of true leadership isn't found in titles or authority. It's measured by the ability to remain steady when chaos reigns. Seneca, the philosopher who advised one of Rome's most volatile emperors, knew this intimately. No man can rule others, he wrote, until he first rules himself. Picture a captain navigating a storm. Their crew doesn't need grand speeches or brute force. They need someone whose hands don't shake on the wheel. That's Stoic leadership in action, an unwavering presence that anchors others not through control, but through self-mastery. Consider a parent managing a toddler's meltdown in a crowded grocery store. The easy response is frustration or embarrassment, escalating the chaos. But the Stoic parent pauses not to suppress their own stress, but to model how to handle it. They kneel to eye level, speak softly, and show that big emotions don't require big reactions. In that moment, they're not just calming a child, they're teaching resilience by embodying it. The same principle applies to a CEO addressing a company crisis. Panic spreads faster than facts, but a leader who responds with measured clarity, they transform turbulence into trust. History's most revered leaders shared this trait. When Nelson Mandela emerged from 27 years in prison, he faced a nation on the brink of civil war. His response wasn't vengeance, but an invitation to reconciliation, not because he lacked anger, but because he'd mastered its direction. Like Seneca, who endured exile with grace, Mandela understood that leadership isn't about wielding power over others, it's about demonstrating power over oneself. Now apply this to your own sphere of influence. Maybe you're not governing a country or running a corporation, but somewhere today around a dinner table, in a team meeting, even in a tense text thread, you have the chance to lead through equilibrium. When a coworker shifts blame unfairly, do you mirror their defensiveness or redirect the conversation to solutions? When your partner snaps after a long day, do you escalate or offer the calm that helps them recenter? Stoic leadership thrives in these micro moments. It's the teacher who treats a disruptive student with patience, showing the class that dignity isn't conditional on others' behavior. It's the coach who focuses on effort over outcomes, building athletes who value growth more than trophies. Seneca's letters to Nero often circled back to one theme: he who takes offense at nothing disarms others. That's the secret. Your composure isn't just for you. It's a gift that gives others permission to rise. So here's the question lingering in the air: where could your steadiness become someone else's lifeline today? Not in a grand gesture, but in the quiet choice to respond instead of react. Because the world doesn't need more people who lead by force. It needs those who lead by example, proving that the strongest influence flows not from authority, but from alignment. And when you embody that truth, you don't just guide others, you invite them to discover their own unshakable core. Wealth isn't measured in gold or possessions. It's found in the space between what you have and what you desire. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher who lived with little more than a clay lamp and a wooden bowl, put it bluntly: wealth consists not in having great possessions, but in having few wants. That's the paradox of Stoic joy. The less you demand from the world to feel complete, the richer your experience becomes. Imagine two travelers, one fretting over a delayed flight, the other savoring the unexpected hour to read in the quiet airport corner. Same circumstance, entirely different realities. The difference isn't in their surroundings, it's in their ability to find fulfillment independent of them. Consider how we chase happiness like it's a destination. A promotion will finally make us content. A bigger house will bring peace. But the Stoics observed a pattern. Every time we grasp those external markers, the goalposts move again. Seneca, who navigated both poverty and immense wealth, warned that to be happy is to be self-sufficient, not isolated, but free from the illusion that joy is something to acquire rather than uncover. Picture a child enthralled by a cardboard box while the expensive toy inside gathers dust. That's not naivety, it's a masterclass in presence. Luxury dazzles, but simple pleasures, sunlight through leaves, a shared laugh, the weight of a book in your hands sustain. Modern research echoes this ancient insight. Studies on hedonic adaptation reveal how quickly we normalize new comforts. The thrill of a raise fades within months. The new car becomes just a car. Yet the scent of rain on dry earth, the warmth of a held gaze, these don't lose their potency because they're not commodities. They're experiences woven into the fabric of attention. The Stoics called this eudaimonia, flourishing that comes from aligning with your deepest values, not accumulating trophies. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Very little is needed to make a happy life," he wasn't advocating austerity. He was pointing to the liberation of realizing you already hold the keys. So here's an invitation. What's one moment of uncelebrated joy you brushed past this week? Maybe it was the stillness of waking before your alarm, or the way your coffee steamed in the morning light. Not the highlights you posted online, but the quiet pockets of aliveness you barely noticed. The musician Nick Cave once described happiness as a skill you refine, not a prize you win. The Stoics would agree. Joy isn't waiting for you in some future achievement, it's whispering in the spaces between your striving, asking only that you pause long enough to let it in. Building unshakable resilience isn't about grand gestures, it's the daily repetition of small, intentional choices that rewire your reflexes over time. Think of it like training for a marathon by running just 1 mile each morning. The Stoics mastered this through micro-practices, bite-sized exercises that turn philosophy into lived experience. Start with this 7-day challenge focused on the dichotomy of control. Each morning, write down one situation you'll likely encounter where your reaction is the only real variable. Maybe it's your commute, a meeting with a difficult colleague, or even waiting in line for coffee. Then, like a scientist observing an experiment, Note your mental and emotional responses when those moments arrive. Did you tense up when traffic stalled, or did you use the pause to listen to an inspiring podcast? The goal isn't to judge yourself, but to spot the gap between what you can't change and how you can choose to meet it. Take something as ordinary as a delayed package delivery. Most people refresh the tracking number obsessively or vent frustration at customer service. But your Stoic challenge, use the waiting as a mindfulness bell. Each time you catch yourself fixating on the delay, pivot to something within your control, organizing a drawer, calling a friend, or simply practicing patience like it's a muscle needing reps. Epictetus trained his students this way, turning daily irritations into gym equipment for the mind. Practice hearing a noise without reacting, he'd say, or someone bumping into you without irritation. These weren't hypotheticals, they were drills for life's inevitable friction. Now amplify the exercise. For 1 week, carry a small notebook and tally how often you conflate external events with your power to respond. A cancelled flight isn't just a logistical headache. It's a chance to observe whether you default to helplessness or agency. A critical email isn't just an insult. It's a test of your ability to separate useful feedback from noise. By Friday, you'll notice patterns. Perhaps you're quick to blame circumstances but slow to claim your own emotional sovereignty. That awareness is gold. It shows exactly where to focus your training. Here's the twist. Pair this with evening reflection. Before bed, ask not just what tried my patience today, but where did I redirect that energy productively? Maybe you transformed a frustrating wait into a chance to people watch and brainstorm creative ideas. Maybe you caught yourself mid-complaint and switched to gratitude for having the resources to order that delayed package in the first place. The Stoics called this synesis, the wisdom of connecting daily dots to reveal larger truths about your growth. So here's your invitation. Which Stoic principle will you test drive tomorrow? Will it be amorfati when your lunch order gets messed up, treating the wrong sandwich as a chance to try something new? Or perhaps premeditatio malorum, by mentally rehearsing a tough conversation before it happens. Choose one lever, just one, and pull it deliberately for 24 hours. Notice how a single day of practiced awareness can shift your entire relationship with chaos. Because unshakable calm isn't a trait you're born with. It's a skill forged in the ordinary fires of traffic jams, spilled coffee, and Mondays. And that's where the real transformation begins, not on the pages of ancient texts, but in the living laboratory of your daily life. The journey to becoming unshakable isn't about suppressing emotions or pretending life's storms don't exist. It's about mastering the mental processes that let you navigate them with clarity and purpose. We've explored the 3 pillars of Stoic resilience: the discipline of control, where you separate what you can influence from what you can't; the discipline of perception, where you reframe obstacles as opportunities; and the discipline of action, where you align your choices with your deepest values. These aren't mystical traits reserved for ancient philosophers. They're trainable skills, like muscles that strengthen with repetition. Every time you pause before reacting, question your automatic judgments, or choose integrity over convenience, you're not just handling a moment, you're sculpting a mindset. Marcus Aurelius, who faced wars, betrayals, and plagues without losing his center, left us this rallying cry: you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That's the heart of it. Unshakability isn't armor against life's chaos. It's the quiet certainty that no matter what happens, you control the one thing that truly matters: your response. And the beauty, you don't need to overhaul your life overnight. Start small. Pick one practice from this video. Maybe it's the evening reflection to unpack your day, or the morning ritual to set your intentions. Perhaps it's simply asking, is this within my control? When frustration flares, consistency, not perfection, is the key. So here's your invitation. Don't let this be just another video you watch and forget. Let it be the day you begin building your inner citadel. Hit subscribe to keep deepening your Stoic toolkit. Every new insight is another brick in your foundation. Because the unshakable you isn't some distant ideal. It's the person who takes the first step today, then the next one tomorrow, knowing that every challenge is just another chance to grow stronger. The path is clear, the tools are in your hands. Now what will you choose to build?